you. I hope you can just about see me above the podium. I feel a little bit guilty now that my schedule means you don't have time for questions to Marina, because I thought that was absolutely fascinating presentation. I'm really pleased that to see so many researchers and policymakers gathered here today. It's really important to make those connections between climate and health. Just 2 days ago, the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, stood up in the House of Commons and for the first time gave a speech that made that link between climate and the nature systems, which is something that many campaigners, many people concerned about the future of our planet have been crying out for. And he really outlined Ed does like his science. He's a bit of a geek when it comes to science, but this was very much trying to reiterate that we want a science-led approach to the crises that we are facing. And he outlined the gravity of that threat, not just in terms of emissions, not just in terms of rising temperatures, but the threat to our way of life and the health of our society. And we hope that that will become an annual event. We believe that the government has a duty to be honest with people about the scale of the crises and the action we're taking. But we also want to deliver a message of hope, because that's the only way that we will be able to bring people with us to deliver the change that we need. It's not that we are in crisis now and there is action to be taken. There is already a lot of good action being taken, and we want to inspire people by showing that things can be done and that we can change things. Monday's address was a response to the Met Office's annual report for 2024, which found out that in the last decade, the number of days that had been 10 degrees above the 1961 to 1990 average has quadrupled. And we saw the figures from Marina about those rises in temperatures. For the first time ever, we've broken the 40-degree barrier for July. And we know that when temperatures peaked in summer 2022, we saw that our system just couldn't cope with those sort of levels. And Emma Howard-Boyd is here today, and I had this quite frightening meeting with her in Bristol about a year ago, just before the election, when she was telling me about the work she was doing for Sadiq on climate resilience of cities and what happened once they're just little fractions of degrees can even make a huge difference. During that heat wave of 2022, that was estimated to cause 3,000 excess deaths. Overall, there's been 10,000 deaths from heat waves over the last few years. And it's not just the direct impact on our health, it's also the indirect impacts. Again, Marina touched on some of this. On food production, UK wheat production declined by over 20% last year due to devastating rainfall, which was much heavier than it should have been because of climate change. But obviously also there's the impact of heat and drought. These statistics make for deeply troubling reading. We don't want to take the easy option of pretending that climate change isn't happening or that all its effects can be mitigated. We want to act, and that's exactly what we're doing. So from the day we came into government last year, we've been clear that one of the Keir Starmer as Prime Minister has 5 missions, as the health mission as well, but one of the missions is this clean power by 2030. And just to sort of run through a few of the things that we've done to achieve that, we've set up Great British Energy, we lifted the onshore wind ban, we approved 2 gigawatts renewable power, we've moved ahead with nuclear, we're doing things like carbon capture and hydrogen storage. The clean energy industries are now growing at 3 times the rate of the rest of the economy, and we've seen £40 billion of investment into clean energy announced since last July. So that's what we're doing in terms of, it's one of the things we're doing. We also have effort share across government, whether that's transport, housing, DEFRA. They all have to be part of that effort share to help us meet our carbon budget delivery plans. But we also, I think it was really important that we stepped up back onto the international stage, because you gain the right to show international leadership by demonstrating leadership at home, and that's what we did as soon as we got into government. But Keir Starmer also went to COP29, he stood up, he announced an ambitious NDC of reducing emissions by 81% by 2035. And that was very much signalling that we wanted to lead those international efforts. We set up a global clean power alliance. We've signed new climate agreements with India and China, obviously incredibly important to bring them on board. We're championing UK investors to invest in emerging and developing economies. We had a really fantastic London Climate Action Week a few weeks ago. It was double the size of previous ones. I thought what was particularly good is there was still quite rightly a big focus on our tech sector, on our financial sector. We know that the City of London can really help drive investment across the globe. But there was also much more buy-in from other sectors like fashion, sports, the creative industries. And I think that's what you need if you want to, again, create this real sense of momentum behind what we're trying to do. I'll just finish on a final statistic. 10 years ago, when the world negotiated the Paris Agreement, we were on course for 4 degrees of global warming. Today, we've brought that trajectory down to between 2 and 3 degrees. Of course, that still means there's a huge threat posed by that. There's a long way to go, but that shows that agreeing to act and acting upon those promises made at Paris has already been making an effect. We need to do all we can to keep global warming under 2 degrees, but ideally down aligned with 1.5 degrees. Everybody here today has a role to play in that. Hopefully when I answer some questions, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about some of the other things that we hope to be able to do to involve you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that overview. Now, interesting, you touched on the UK's international leadership role. What do you see as that role, particularly in making the health impacts of climate change more visible and better integrated into international climate policy?
Yeah. So one thing I discovered when we got into government, we obviously hosted COP26 in Glasgow a few years ago. And it was widely seen as a very successful COP, but there were so many initiatives that came out of it. And Brazil, who are hosting COP30 later this year in the Amazon, they are very keen that we show that we're in delivery mode now. They don't want new initiatives and that. And some of the things that flow from that, for example, we co-chaired the Power in Past Coal Alliance. So Marina's presentation talked about the particular impact of, the devastating impact of coal use. It's the most dangerous fossil fuel. So with the Power in Past Coal Alliance, which we co-chair with Canada, we're basically encouraging ambition amongst other countries to phase out coal as soon as possible, and that includes supporting them with the deliverables on the clean energy instead. We lead on forests in a number of respects, and that came up, and I think there'll be a big theme at COP this year. We co-chaired the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership with Guyana, and that is partly about protecting standing forests, which is really important because they are the green lungs of the earth, but also about reforestation. And it's not just about forests, it's about our peatlands, our oceans. They're all capable of absorbing huge amounts of carbon. So one of the things we did during London Climate Action Week, well, we started announcing it at COP29, is because of our role as a financial centre, of the leading financial centre, and being at the forefront of financial innovation, developing high integrity carbon and nature markets. So there's been a lot of concerns about greenwashing in the past, where companies will invest in forests and other nature-based solutions to climate change. But we think that if we can establish high integrity markets, you'll be able to channel huge amounts of finance through to, say, for example, to small island states, to the forest countries. So that's something that we're particularly leading on. We've set up, one of the things we've more recently done is earlier this year became co-chairs of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which is acting particularly on super pollutants, so on methane and F-gases, things, black carbon. Ed Miliband announced a couple of weeks ago that we're going to develop a methane action plan, which is something that some of the Lords have been pushing for, particularly. They did a very good report on this. But that is, again, we wanted to work with countries like China, and hopefully have a big moment at Brazil where because those super pollutants, they're shorter lived, but in the short term, they're more damaging during the short years that they do exist and cause damage. So there's a whole raft of initiatives. But I would say on sort of the health side, it's a Climate Clean Air Coalition, really important. There's the Clean Cooking Initiative, which is more FCDO involved, but that is absolutely transformational at a very local level, getting away from dirty fuels for cooking. And also, yeah, the forest issue, I think that the link to the food systems that was mentioned, I think that's really important as well.
I mean, we all know that there are limits to what the human body can actually cope with from extreme heat and air pollution. How is the government preparing for these health risks when you're planning for climate impacts? And what can be done to protect people's health as these conditions change?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's really been brought home to people, partly because of the work that people like Emma has done, I know the Mayor of Paris has been doing a lot of work on this as well, is we've tended to always focus on keeping people warm. So we had as a result of the recent spending review, we've got 13.2 billion now to spend on the Warm Homes Plan. And there was also taking action in terms of new build homes, decent home standards, make sure they're properly insulating and so on. So that is still really important, and it's easy to forget when it's a very hot summer day that actually there are still people dying of cold and living in very, very poor quality or poorly insulated homes. So we want to roll out heat pumps, insulate homes, solar panels and roof and all that, and make sure that obligations on landlords to provide decent quality accommodation. So there's that. But I think it was something Ed had acknowledged on Monday when he did his statement that if you're installing the heat pumps, perhaps we should now be looking at the air conditioning side of things as well. And we are leading on, there's something called Mission Innovation that meets once a year. We provide the Secretariat, and that is where all the brains come together to look at what the technical solutions are to these things. So that cooling initiative is something that we're looking at as well. But again, if you look at I keep going back to Emma's report because it really did sort of stick in my mind, but the fact that I think I'm right in saying our rails can't cope once you get to about 33 degrees, there's a threat that the railway tracks start buckling. How do you, do you just accept that these hotter temperatures are here to stay? And it has to be woven into our future infrastructure strategy, our industrial strategy and everything. But I think there was also, it is a poverty-related issue, because even if it's down to just buying fans or having aircon in your houses, but I think that's something that we really need to sort of bear in mind as well, in the same way that keeping warm's a poverty-related issue.
Now, you mentioned the Climate Change Committee's latest report. It highlighted that adaptation planning in the UK is not keeping pace with rising risks. How do you respond to that challenge, and what actions are being taken to close the adaptation gap?
Yeah, I think that's really. I think there's sort of three things in a way. There's the adaptation to climate change, which, again, I mean, it sits with DEFRA rather than DESNES. And there has always tended to be a focus on flooding, because that was the most immediate impact that we saw of climate change. And now I think there's also like the whole broader resilience agenda where the Cabinet Office comes into it as well. But what we're trying to do in government is to have very much more cross-departmental working, so you do bring those different elements together. So in terms of some of the things like flooding, there's nature-based solutions to that, and working with the water companies or the farmers, we've got a land use framework coming. So just simple things like rewinding rivers, rather than farmers allowing runoff on their land, means that you don't get flooding at the bottom of the valley. There's things like that, but I think the Climate Change Committee was quite right to sort of show, that there's more that needs to be done across the piece. And that's also globally, we agreed a new climate goal at COP29, and there's basically core funding of 300 billion, which will be mostly met by the donor countries. And then there's another 1.3 trillion that's been identified that we need to leverage in. And I think increasingly it's seen that the outer core of funding will be more on the mitigation side, because mitigation effort, that they're part of the economy. If you're supporting the transition to renewables, there's an economic return on doing that. If you're decarbonising industry and setting up a clean alternative, there's a bit of an economic return. Easier to get the private sector to invest in that. But in terms of that core funding, I think increasingly that's been identified for the adaptation side of things.
Thank you very much, Minister for Climate, Kerry McCarthy. I'm sure everybody's been very eager to hear what's going on behind those big doors. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.